Hello and welcome to this BloombergQuint Facebook Live special on the Brexit. Now, a Brexit it is, and it was expected to be close, but few really expected this to actually happen. Most opinion polls until yesterday actually indicated that the Leave camp was... Alex, you want to go in here?
Yeah, it was actually it was ahead till yesterday, and it came as a surprise today that the Brexit actually came through, and possibly the first political fallout of the Brexit was when David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, announced that he would be leaving office in October. So this is a speech that he made earlier today.
The country has just taken part in a giant democratic exercise, perhaps the biggest in our history. Over 33 million people from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and Gibraltar have all had their say. We should be proud of the fact that in these islands we trust the people with these big decisions. We not only have a parliamentary democracy, but on questions about the arrangements for how we're governed, there are times when it is right to ask the people themselves, and that is what we have done. The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. I want to thank everyone who took part in the campaign on my side of the argument, including all those who put aside party differences to speak in what they believed was the national interest. And let me congratulate all those who took part in the Leave campaign for the spirited and passionate case that they made. The will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, not least because so many things were said by so many different organisations about the significance of this decision. So there can be no doubt about the result. Across the world, people have been watching the choice that Britain has made. I would reassure those markets and investors that Britain's economy is fundamentally strong. And I would also reassure Brits living in European countries and European citizens living here that there will be no immediate changes in your circumstances. There will be no initial change in the way our people can travel, in the way our goods can move, or the way our services can be sold. We must now prepare for a negotiation with the European Union. This will need to involve the full engagement of the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland governments to ensure that the interests of all parts of our United Kingdom are protected and advanced. But above all, this will require strong, determined and committed leadership. I'm very proud and very honoured to have been Prime Minister of this country for 6 years. I believe we've made great steps, with more people in work than ever before in our history, with reforms to welfare and education, increasing people's life chances, building a bigger and stronger society, keeping our promises to the poorest people in the world, and enabling those who love each other to get married whatever their sexuality. But above all, restoring Britain's economic strength. And I'm grateful to everyone who's helped to make that happen. I've also always believed that we have to confront big decisions, not duck them. That is why we delivered the first coalition government in 70 years to bring our economy back from the brink. It's why we delivered a fair, legal and decisive referendum in Scotland. And it's why I made the pledge to renegotiate Britain's position in the European Union and to hold a referendum on our membership, and have carried those things out. I fought this campaign in the only way I know how, which is to say directly and passionately what I think and feel, head, heart and soul. I held nothing back. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. but I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required. There is no need for a precise timetable today, but in my view we should aim to have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Party conference in October. Delivering stability will be important, and I will continue in post as Prime Minister with my Cabinet for the next 3 months. The Cabinet will meet on Monday. The Governor of the Bank of England is making a statement about the steps that the Bank and the Treasury are taking to reassure financial markets. We will also continue taking forward the important legislation that we set before Parliament in the Queen's speech. And I've spoken to Her Majesty the Queen this morning to advise her of the steps that I'm taking. A negotiation with the European Union will need to begin under a new Prime Minister. And I think it's right that this new Prime Minister takes the decision about when to trigger Article 50 and start the formal and legal process of leaving the EU. I will attend the European Council next week to explain the decision the British people have taken and my own decision. The British people have made a choice. That not only needs to be respected, but those on the losing side of the argument, myself included, should help to make it work. Britain is a special country. We have so many great advantages. A parliamentary democracy where we resolve great issues about our future through peaceful debate. A great trading nation with our science and arts, our engineering and our creativity respected the world over. And while we are not perfect, I do believe we can be a model of a multiracial, multi-faith democracy where people can come and make a contribution and rise to the very highest that their talent allows. Although leaving Europe was not the path I recommended, I am the first to praise our incredible strengths. I said before that Britain can survive outside the European Union, and indeed that we could find a way. Now the decision has been made to leave, we need to find the best way. And I will do everything I can to help. I love this country, and I feel honoured to have served it. And I will do everything I can in future to help this great country succeed.
So you just heard David Cameron's speech earlier today, and it's interesting because it seems Britain is uncertain about its future, and on the other hand you see that the European Union is actually unsure about whether it will survive or not, because this is a quote from Donald Tusk actually earlier today. He says, he's the president of the European Council of course, and he says we are prepared for this negative scenario. There will be no legal vacuum. On behalf of all 27 leaders, we are determined to keep our unity as 27. Of course, he wasn't the only one reacting. We had Enda Kenny as well, who said, I want to assure the Irish public that we have prepared to the greatest extent possible for the eventuality of the UK leaving the EU. Remember, it's very important with this statement, Enda Kenny actually reassuring the denizens of the Irish Republic, because some experts have suggested that a Brexit would actually knock off nearly 0.5 to 1.6% of Ireland's GDP. There was more reactions as well. Michael Roth, Minister of State from Germany, a really sad day for UK and Europe. Europeans must stand united now. People deserve a better EU. And of course, what's a set of political reactions without Donald Trump? Donald Trump tweeted earlier today saying, just arrived in Scotland, places going wild over the vote. They took their country back, just like we will take America back. No games. So that's about how politicians around the world reacted to a Brexit. But Alex, what about the markets?
Well, Aayush, none of the markets had anticipated that the Brexit would go through, and that's what made the reaction that much stronger. So, in the eye of the storm, the pound sterling dropped 9% at one point, and then it clawed back some ground. The yen gained to below 100 versus the dollar during the day, and investors flocked to gold in this moment of uncertainty. No safe havens in the equity market, however. Asia was trading when the Brexit news broke and closed between 2 to 8% lower. The Nikkei faring the worst with a near 8% fall. Indian equities were also under pressure. The Nifty and the Sensex losing around 2%, and the rupee ended down 1%. European markets, understandably, were the worst hit, falling 6 to 8%. By evening, the shock had more or less faded a bit, and as we speak, key indices in the US were trading down 2%. So currencies, however, will be in focus over the next week, and that's exactly what I talked about today to a currency trader, a treasurer, in fact, in one of the banks operating out of India. Harihar Krishnamurthy had this to say.
Hari, Brexit has happened. You mentioned that a lot of people didn't expect it to sail through, but it did. Today, has the RBI already stepped in and intervened several times? Is that what your traders are telling you?
So you would never ever know these kind of things, but there has been supply coming in above that 68 levels. Now it could be from state-run banks who are offering the dollars. It could also be from smart exporters who are thinking that this aberration is not necessarily justified by fundamentals. Now if you're an exporter and you see the spot dollar at 68 and you have a forward premiums which is running at 4 rupees plus, you're locking into 72 rupees to a dollar.
Right.
Now these are levels to go and sell. So if you're a currency advisor, you would probably tell your customers lock into your exports, especially if you have far forward exports, and probably stay open on the import side. So it's been a bit of exporters selling and probably state-run banks intervention.
How far is it possible, in your view, that the rupee will slide, and is it likely that FIIs will pull out of emerging markets and that will affect the currency?
Is it possible? Yes. So when you see the way the money is moving, in India 2014 we had total FI inflows of 2,65,000 crores. 2015 we had 65,000 crores. This year to date, it's only 4,000 crores. So already the FIs have been pumping money into India in a lesser way. They've been selling on the debt, they've been buying on the equity, but net is only 5,000 crores. This kind of an event is going to take its toll on the stock markets and make all governments pump money in and loosen the monetary policy, stoking inflation in the process. High possibility that the FIs may back off. Within the EM space, I suspect we will suffer the least because we are still a 7% plus growth economy, which is not the case with the others. But you are going to generally see a risk off situation and money going into dollar index, money going into gold. We've already seen gold at $13, $30, $40 per troy ounce. So this is going to continue until we see some sense, some stability coming into the marketplace. So FI is back up, but I think we are in a safe space where the FDI flows have more than countered the FPI outflows. So I still think the rupee can fall a little bit more if all the dollar indexes.
So what's the level that you're looking at?
See, left to itself, I think the rupee will stabilize at 68, give or take. But if the dollar index were to start going towards the 100 level, which it did a few months back, it will be inevitable that you will see the rupee falling. But ironically, what people are saying is that Yellen, the Fed chair, had clearly alluded to Brexit being a very definitive kind of risk to her interest rate hike policy.
Right. So
now that it's happened, she's going to hold back. If she holds back, I think after the initial emotions are done, you will see people saying that this is actually good from a global liquidity standpoint of view. And not just that, Mario Draghi will actually have to pump in more, which he's been promising all the while but not doing. So he will pump in more. The UK may have to pump more into the market. So global liquidity actually may be better off now after Brexit than it was. So once some sanity comes into the marketplace, who knows, India may be a beneficiary and the rupee may not really weaken.
So that's the word coming in from currency traders here. Over the course of the day, it's interesting, a lot of government officials, Aayush, stepped in and made statements. And I think their primary objective was really to calm the markets. Let's take a look at what Mr. Arun Jaitley had to say. What he said is that India's immediate and medium-term firewalls are solid in the form of healthy reserve positions. Now, he was referring to the foreign exchange reserves, and that's almost what all the other officials that spoke had to say as well. Shaktikanta Das, the Economic Affairs Secretary, said that the market reaction is instant and that it will stabilize over the next few days. He also said that India has enough firepower to deal with the situation. Now, his words were more or less echoed again by Arvind Subramaniam, the Chief Economic Advisor, who said simply India has a lot of ammunition to deal with the Brexit. And finally, the Reserve Bank of India governor said that the RBI is continuously watching the market developments both in India as well as internationally and will take the necessary steps, including liquidity support in the form of both dollar and rupee, to ensure orderly conditions in the financial markets.
You know, one thing is certain, right? Britain isn't leaving the EU just yet. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Yeah. In fact, this is when Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty actually comes in. There will be a notice sent out, and Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty basically talks about a 2-year negotiation process with EU members. All 27 members of the EU have to actually agree unanimously to the terms of negotiation. Right, Alex? So what's interesting here is that many experts tell me that this might take even 5 years because of the political differences. Yeah. So this will be a long, drawn affair. But that really begs the question, what happens next? That's why I spoke to leading corporate lawyer in London, Peter King, and I was looking for some answers. So this is what I started off by asking him. Hello and welcome to this BloombergQuint video on Brexit. And a Brexit it is. Not only have the Britons decided to actually exit the EU, but we've also just heard from David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, and he will be stepping down in October. To discuss the short-term, medium-term and long-term implications of this, I have with me top London lawyer Peter King. Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. King. I'd like to start by asking you, originally we thought that this would really kick in Article 50. What's the whole deal with Article 50 now, after we've heard from the Prime Minister?
Article 50 is the provision of the treaty which allows a country to exit from the European Union. And it provides for a 2-year timetable for that exit. Most people think that 2 years would be too short from the UK's point of view. And one of the questions has always been, following a referendum, will the Article 50 notice be given immediately or after a period of time? And during that period of time, maybe some more negotiations will take place. What the Prime Minister said so far is that that won't be a decision for him, that will be a decision for his successor. So we won't know about the Article 50 notice until October at the earliest. And most probably, and most people agree on this, the process will take not just 2 years, but probably 3 to 5 years at least before the process of exit is complete. So we're looking at a very long period of uncertainty.
Right, Mr. King. Also in terms of the divorce proceedings, really, because eventually Britain will be exiting the EU. I'd like to ask you a couple of things. When do these proceedings start?
So the formal start of them is with this notice that's given under Article 50. Informally, however, they start next week because the Prime Minister is going to the European Council meeting, and at that point he will be starting to talk to the EU partners about how the divorce might work. And of course, we have no experience of this. The only country ever to have left the EU is Greenland. And Greenland has a population which is about less than 1/10 of that of the UK. So a completely different situation. And there is an enormous amount of work to do to negotiate the terms of the exit.
Absolutely, Mr. King. And I'd imagine that they'd be in quite a stressful situation there, because they have to do more than a couple of things. Not only do they have to really traverse the path with Brussels, they also need to look at trade deals with other countries from around the world, and at the same time figure out what regulations would apply even domestically in England and in the City of London as well.
Yes, so there's an enormous task here. So we're looking at the divorce proceedings with the EU, as you call them. We're looking at the negotiation of new trade deals with the rest of the world. And so for the last 40 years, the UK has relied upon trade deals negotiated at the European Union level. So there's very little expertise within the UK on negotiating that sort of trade deal. Those are the first two areas. And then the third area is regulation. A significant part of our regulation of industries like financial services, pharmaceuticals, food and so on comes from the EU, and large parts of our corporate and securities law come from the EU as well. So what Britain has to do is to find ways of replicating that regulation, those laws, within our domestic law, so that there's still a possibility for business to operate in an orderly way.
Right, Mr. King, and I'd also like to ask you, in the interim period, whilst these negotiations and renegotiations are actually taking place, would EU law continue to apply? to England, or would it be a sort of a chaotic situation?
No, you're absolutely right. EU law would continue to apply, and during this interim period, we're still a member of the EU, so all the rules that apply at the moment continue to apply to us. And how they will apply and whether there will be any sort of interim changes is a matter for the European Union to decide, and of course we're still part of that decision at the moment.
When it comes to impact on business, and also in terms of how countries like India will be viewed and how they'll be viewing this as well, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is a very big topic. So one of the key areas in relation to business is to look at, for each business, what are your connections with the EU. For example, some large Indian businesses have chosen to invest very heavily in the EU, and some of them have invested through the UK. The automotive industry is a very good example, where a lot of cars are built in the UK by non-EU manufacturers, and the UK has been used as a base by those manufacturers to sell cars to the rest of the European Union. That may or may not make sense after the exit takes place. So businesses around the world are going to be considering their investment in the UK and their investment in the EU, and where their new money should go. Should it go into the UK? Should it go into another EU country, which gives the benefit of the single market? So there's some examples of how businesses will be looking at things. Here's another one. At the moment, there's free mobility of employees within the EU. So if I am a US business and I'm working within the EU and I choose to employ a British person to do something important, and I then want to base that British person in Frankfurt instead of in London, I can do that freely at the moment without needing visas or work permits or anything like that. That will not be the case once the UK has left the EU. So businesses will need to start planning for that sort of lack of employee mobility. And of course it depends on the business. For some businesses these issues won't be important, but for a lot of businesses investing in the EU, particularly in areas like manufacturing, these issues will be very, very significant. And coming back to India, Indian businesses have been looking for the past 20 years at least to expand significantly outside India. And the UK is an obvious place for Indian businesses to come because we have a number of cultural affinities with India. Whether that will make sense in the future is another question, because the UK will no longer be able to operate as the gateway to the European market in the way that it has in the past.
Right, Mr. King, I think as a very quick follow-up question, you did mention immigration as well, and that was one of the key issues surrounding this whole Brexit campaign. Considering, after the exit, there'll be a lot of restrictions and barriers on obviously free movement. Would this also mean that the UK could possibly, the new government could possibly be looking at reconsidering, immigration policies for other countries like India and other emerging markets?
I think that the new government will have an awful lot on its plate to consider how it wants to deal with free movement of people within the European Union. So I don't foresee a significant change in immigration policy for other countries.
Thank you so much for joining us on BloombergQuint.
So Aayush, at the end of a momentous day, what really has Britain won and lost? First things first, the European Union is a single market and it allows for free transfer of goods and people. Britain will lose the tariff benefits that it had for exports to Europe, and people on both sides will no longer be able to cross freely. But people on the Leave side had something to say about that.
They did, Alex. So people supporting the Leave campaign really argued that, being a member of the EU actually came with high costs, uncontrolled immigration from all over Europe, and of course, over-regulation. They wanted a UK free from encumbrances, right? Free from EU control. And well, today they won. Thank you so much for watching BloombergQuint.